and we're live. Welcome to the podcast, everybody. I'm your host, Sean Lavana, and I'm joined today by a special guest. I'll get to that in a minute, but the reason she's here today is that we believe that it's really important for compensation people, compensation pros, to communicate to employees, and that is a bidirectional thing. And so what our guest today is here to talk about is that she's been on this journey, a journey involving fair pay. And I thought it would be really interesting to bring her on and tell her story. Her name is Megan. Megan, welcome to Comp and Coffee.
Thank you. Really glad to do this.
Thank you very much for being here. Very brave thing of you to do. Very curious to hear your journey, but let's start with, tell me about you. Tell me a little bit about your organization. Keep it broad, obviously.
Sure. So I'm on the marketing team at my company. My company is a tech startup in the Boston area of about 300 people. So I've been in marketing for 10 years now and focus on the sales side. So I'm kind of the sales marketing aligner, so to speak. And that's what I've been up to.
And so I obviously teased this out at the beginning that, we're here to talk about fair pay. So I think if I'm to quickly recap, but I want the details from you, you found out that somebody else on your marketing team, a male colleague, made more, right?
Correct. Yes.
Same role?
Same exact role, same exact experience.
Same job description.
Same everything, yes.
It's crazy. And so let's talk about that. How did you find it out? Because I think, we'll get to this in a minute, I think a lot of people think it's taboo to talk about that or even illegal, but we'll address that in a second. How did you find out?
Sure. So this colleague is actually one of my very close friends. We did meet on the job, but we connected very quickly. We're very, very close, and we do report to the same person. And we were both kind of struggling. I think this was last October, and we were kind of, just having event session. And I don't even remember how this part came up, but as part of the conversation, I had said something along the lines of, now, you don't have to respond to this, but I'm going to say it. And this whole situation is, really irks me because I guarantee you that you're making more money than I am.
What made you think that?
So I started at the company maybe 7 months prior to when he did.
Okay.
I started with a different title, different job description, different role. And he, then started 7 months later. And then I essentially got promoted. I know people on the podcast can't see my air quotes, but I'm using them. It was a title change. There was no salary talk, negotiation, nothing actually official with finance.
That's interesting. So you didn't get, like, a lot of times with a promotion, you get a 10% bump or whatever, nothing like that?
Nothing like that, no.
It was a transfer is what it was.
Exactly, yes.
Okay.
So it was still manager level, but it was a different role, and I was taking on far more responsibility.
Sure. So the job description obviously changes.
Exactly. The job description completely changed.
Good comp person will tell you. Should have re-benchmarked that, but go ahead.
Exactly. So I just had that assumption. He's a guy. He started later, and I assumed that. And his response was, of course I will answer that, and I agree with you. So at that point, he felt comfortable to share his compensation, which he shared first. And I found out that the difference was 10%.
So it's fairly substantial. Were there anybody else on the team that got involved in this, or was it just the two that you based off of that?
Everyone got involved to some degree.
I don't want to jump ahead of the story.
No. In terms of talking to other employees and asking their salaries, no, nobody got involved that way. We were the only two on the team that had the same exact role, so it wouldn't have made sense to ask others for that information.
That makes sense. So you realize this happened. Then what?
And it was an awful few days. Quite frankly, just as an employee trying to figure out what to do next. My next move was, we're preparing for reviews. So this was probably the end of October. Reviews happen in February, but the conversation starts in December.
Okay.
And we finally had, I wouldn't say a full HR or people operations team, but we had more of a team than we had in the past. So they were starting the conversation early, and actually had some open office hours to come and talk anything that you wanted to talk about.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, which was a great way to do it. The tough part with that is you have to, with the topic that I wanted to discuss, you need to make sure that no one else is in those office hours.
Right. Right. If there's multiple people like sitting at different ends of the table, basically.
Exactly.
Got it.
So I found that time and told them the story. And I said, this is what I have found out. I would like this to be addressed in annual reviews. I said, ideally sooner rather than later, but at, worst case scenario, at reviews, which are in February. So our HR person looked horrified. And it's funny, I tell people that story and I want to make clear, like, he didn't look horrified to know that I knew. He looked horrified to find out that this had actually happened.
Which is the right reaction, but also interesting that he wasn't aware of it prior.
Exactly. So I don't know how compensation is done at my company. I don't know if it's manager discretion. We don't have a compensation person. So I don't know if it's manager. I don't know if it's people operations. I don't know if it's finance. So I was kind of surprised by his reaction, but I was also happy to know that he was not pleased with the situation. Unfortunately, a month later, that person left the company. So my advocate on that side was gone.
Had any progress been made during that time?
Not to my knowledge. But I did, once he left, and I had planned to do it anyways, but this was kind of my kick to go do it. I did speak with my boss about it. And I told him the story, and he didn't seem as disgusted as the HR person. But he did make it clear that he would look into it and see what he could figure out. And I do trust him. So I trusted to leave it there, and we would talk in February at our reviews. So February rolled around. Great review. Nothing bad was said. It couldn't have gone better. We were working to officially get a new promotion, so a second promotion. But he did have no update on the compensation piece of it. So as a company, which I thought was a little strange, they were doing reviews in February, but compensation updates in April.
So they try to disassociate the two.
Yes. However, keep them on the same cycle. So February rolls around, had my review, perfect review. I actually, I had asked for more critical feedback. We were working on finalizing the second promotion I was going to get, and none of that was going to be done, including compensation, until April, which I thought was a little funny to have them in two separate cycles. So we did address, I meet with my boss on a weekly basis. Every meeting we had, I asked about compensation because I wanted to make sure that it was as important to him as it was to me. And it was a joke, as we got closer to February, closer to March, like, it became a joke. The last question in every one-on-one was, do you have an update on compensation for me? So it became habit. It became something he knew that he was going to be asked. So he would hopefully have some sort of update.
Good and bad there, I guess, right? It shouldn't become a joke, but at the same time,
exactly. You're so right.
If it's that, if he knows it's coming, then hopefully he tracks down an answer.
Exactly. Like, stop being annoying, Megan. Like, I'll figure it out.
Just to make that go
away. Exactly. So while this is all happening, my coworker and I, the one that we have the pay discrepancy on, he and I are talking about this all the time. He and I also meet weekly. And it, like I also mentioned, we're very close. So this topic comes up very often. And we're always kind of brainstorming together what's going to happen if. And if it doesn't go through, if the conversation just doesn't go as hoped, if it takes longer than we thought, really any of like the worst case scenarios.
What was he planning to potentially leave in protest over something like that as well?
Yes. So as part of our conversation, so when we got to April and we got to the day it was compensation review time, he pulled me aside in the morning and said, I just spoke with our boss about the compensation review, and I got mine. And his raise was another 10% raise.
It's pretty substantial.
Very substantial, especially because now I'm looking at close to a 20% raise, or hoping for that.
Difference, yeah, to make up that gap.
Exactly.
Right?
So I start to like finally get nervous because I haven't had an in-depth conversation with my boss since February about this. It was, the one-on-one joking, like, hey, any updates? But we hadn't had a substantial conversation. But I did say, back in February, I expect to be compensated exactly the same as my coworker. And if not, that means like you're promoting one of us or not both of us. I said, obviously that's not the ideal scenario, but that's the only way that makes sense. So we talk in the morning and he says, this is what happened. So now I'm nervous and I say, what if this doesn't happen? And he throws out all of these crazy scenarios he says, I will leave. If that doesn't happen, I'm leaving. To which I call him crazy. Appreciate the support, but think that's crazy. And then he says, well, we'll split the difference. Which
like he would give back half of his raise?
Like he would give back half of his raise to me.
Very nice.
Exactly. I said, that is so nice, but I actually don't think you can do that.
Yeah.
So he said, I'll talk to our boss. I'll talk to our CMO. But we're now getting ahead of ourselves because I hadn't had my conversation yet. So my conversation with our boss was later that afternoon. And I obviously went in knowing more information than he knew I had.
The new information of what just happened that morning.
Exactly. So we sit at the table and he says, here's the raise. It is 10%. So what actually happened was the salary was now matched to my coworker's previous salary.
Right. Had you not had that new information, it would have aligned.
Exactly. So I said, and this was actually probably a little sneaky of me, and I probably shouldn't have done it, but I said, okay, well, does that match his salary? To which his response was, I am not here to discuss anybody else's compensation. And I said, okay, well, I know for a fact it doesn't. And so I kind of got caught in that one because I was hoping he would be upfront, not make me look like the sneaky one there. But so I did tell him, I said, this is ridiculous. We've been talking about this for months now. The raises were the same, but now I'm still behind.
The gap still exists.
Right. And he said, well, we did look at the numbers and I'm happy to walk you through those in more detail. But, at the end of the day, he has more experience and he cited a few projects that he had worked on, which I thought was completely unfair. We have the same role, but in order to get the full job done, there are projects that we need to work on independently.
Sure.
So at the end of the day, I can present you with a list of things he has done and things I have done, and then our boss's comment is no longer relevant.
Yeah, well, the argument would be same experience, same role, same job description, and then same performance.
Right, and that was one of the things that you just mentioned he didn't agree with. He said that the experience was not the same and that my coworker had more, which was absolutely not the case, and it's not something to form an opinion on. It's something to look at facts about. Exactly,
right. You should be able to look at both your backgrounds, and but this is some of the fun area of the new laws that are going into effect where this is gray, right? And so at some point that will need to be standardized. How do you determine that?
Exactly. And I think, like you said, it's just such a gray area that nobody really understands that.
It is brand new and it's not. So we'll talk about it again in a minute, that since this was happening in Massachusetts, there is a law that went into effect as of July 1st that helps protect against this. But there's going to have to be a lot of cases that come through to help clear up some of the gray areas, just as with any law.
Exactly. So after this, I left very angry, which I shouldn't have been. because I left with a 10% raise. That should be exciting for an employee. I had been there for over a year, close to a year and a half at this point, and it was the first raise because it was the first cycle I had been eligible for one. And that's a significant raise.
Great raise independent of itself if you didn't have that additional information.
Exactly. So after that, I spoke with my coworker and, he went into his own little rage and we had a minute about it. And I decided that this was a Friday going into a long weekend. So I had said, I need to talk to our CMO about this. I can't just leave this. I can't leave for the weekend with this hanging over my head because I know I have to do something about it on Monday or Tuesday. So I spoke with my CMO, and the conversation did not go well at all. My CMO is a male, and I truly believe I really respect him as our CMO, but I do believe that there is some unconscious bias in some of the business practices that really the whole company has, but even the marketing team as a whole. And man, that word unconscious bias or that phrase, the amount of Google searches I have done to find all of this information. There's actually
why it is.
Exactly. And I'm sure a lot of people on this podcast are familiar with Mark Benioff at Salesforce and what he did to make the gender pay gap right at his company.
Right.
And how he addressed himself that, yes, this company has a problem with unconscious bias. And so that article and his segment on 60 Minutes became my Bible for this. And everything the way I was speaking to people, the way I was interacting about the whole process came from what I had learned and what I had seen from a company like Salesforce and a person like Mark Benioff.
So I don't want to interrupt the flow here, but I'm curious, what made you want to stick it out with this employer and hope that they would do the right thing as opposed to being like, you know what, that attitude's there, that bias is there, I'm not going to be able to change it, I'm out? No,
that's a great question. I really like what my company is doing as a business. I think there is something really important to what we do. And I think we are on a real good trajectory to grow that and do that the best in the business. So I think there's a lot of potential in my career there. I think there's a lot of potential in the company. So for me, it was worth fighting this out to make sure that they did the right thing. If they didn't do the right thing, we'd be having a completely different conversation today. And I'd be having this conversation at a much greater level if they didn't do the right thing too. But I wanted to give them the opportunity to do the right thing.
All right. So go to the CMO, who is, just for clarification, your boss's boss?
Correct. Yes. So I went, and he was also the one that hired me. So my boss started after I did. So I have a different relationship with our CMO than a lot of people on the team because he was the person to offer me the position and interview me and do that process with. So we met and I said, here's the story. And I told him everything I've just told you. I don't understand where the difference is. I don't agree with it. And I need you to help me figure that out, or I need you to help me make it right. And he said something that has stuck with me, and it really, it sucked. It really sucked to hear. And he said, I love working with you, and I think you're awesome. And I love working with your coworker, and I also think he is awesome. But if I had to hire one of you again, he's like, I would hire you both again in a second, but if I could only hire one of you, I would hire him. And that totally crushed me. And then again, I'm like, well, because he's a guy. Is he that much of a better employee than I am? Or is he a guy? And I don't believe he's that much of a better employee than I am. Like I said, we're super close. He's one of my best friends. But I think we both carry our weight equally. He's much better at certain things, and I am much better at certain things, and we balance each other out very well. which is why we work so well together. And the other part about that comment that really killed me was that it wasn't constructive.
Yeah, you're never going to be in that situation.
Exactly. And it's like I can't do anything with that.
Also true.
I can't. What could I do? What can I do to make you want to hire me again over him? I have no idea. And that's not a fair question. So I left that day and did not feel good about the person that hired me in to, help build the marketing team, or the person that backed my boss when I was ready for this promotion. It's put a damper on our relationship, and for a while, really, it did make me question what I was doing at this company and why I was working so hard to stay happy there. And I don't even know when the flip switched, but as I mentioned, I was meeting weekly with my boss. And at one of our meetings, his tone just changed, and I think it was when the promotion was becoming more to the forefront, and that it was actually like paperwork was being drawn up and it was finally happening, is when he kind of switched his attitude and really became my advocate. So instead of me at the end of every one-on-one saying, hey, any updates, he would always have on the top of his list an update for me on where he stood in the conversation.
That's great.
Knowing that he had to make it right. And I wish I knew the why behind it. But I don't. I don't know if it was the July 1st deadline, or I don't know if it finally kind of clicked with him. I wish I did, and maybe someday I'll ask and find out. But as of July 1st, the promotion came through, and the raise, the now matching with my coworker, that all came through officially on July 1st.
That was going to be my follow-up question for you. It was on July 1st, huh?
It was on July 1st, and I've had a lot of people ask me, well, are you going to go and ask them about, retroactively paying you? And I think I should, but I'm exhausted. It's been a really trying process.
I don't mean to laugh, by the way. It was more like I'm laughing out of the frustration, too. Like, I can't imagine fighting that fight and then, oh, hey, and also ask him about this on your way out. Right?
I know. It's like you get 2 steps forward, 1 step back type of process. And I do think it's rotten, quite frankly, that he has been making this salary since April. And quite frankly, the salary before that since July of last year.
Since he started, yeah.
But at the end of the day, they did the right thing. I got what I deserved. And I'm trying to get used to saying what I deserve versus what I wanted, because I do think they're 2 different things.
Agreed.
I did get what I deserved, and it's kind of reaffirmed my commitment to the company. So, yeah.
I was going to ask you at any given time, did that, so on July 1st, the Mass Equal Pay Act took effect. It's been, it was enacted a while ago, but didn't take effect until July 1st. I was going to ask you if that came up at all, but it doesn't sound like it did.
No, it didn't at all. I actually never, aside from the conversation that I referenced earlier about meeting with our People Ops team in the office hours, I never spoke to anyone in HR about this. I trusted my boss to be having those conversations. At the beginning, he wasn't. Towards the end, he did come through for me and do that. But no, the Equal Pay Act never came up, which is a little...
Its presence was known, I sense.
Yes. I at least hope so.
Yeah.
But yeah, I hope that wasn't the reason why. I hoped they had wanted to do the right thing as a company anyway.
If you're giving them the benefit of the doubt, I think that's a fair argument to make, because we're hearing a lot about it now, where the biggest thing is that 2 parts to that law, right? Pay equally for the equal job. But then secondly, you can't ask salary history, right? You can no longer ask what you make when you're interviewing for a new job. So both of those together are supposed to true up that gap. I think if you were to give them the benefit of the doubt, because a lot of employers could argue performance, a lot of employers could argue their different duties. They could have taken those arguments and really tried to push on it to see what would happen if they really were not inclined to do the right thing. So regardless of the deadline, I think that initiative is probably there.
I hope so.
Yeah,
I agree.
So I'm curious. Then clearly it's come through how this made you feel. It clearly, for a while anyway, affected your relationship with the employer and distracted from it sounds like you're very mission driven, right? From what you said about the organization itself. Those things can hamper that, right? So this is where compensation and the ability to do the right things can really come to the fore of making sure employees are motivated, doing the right thing, aligned with the organization. What would be your advice to people that are in your similar spot, and how would you advocate for them to navigate it?
Yeah, I would say, and someone said this to me, it's not my own quote, though I wish it was, but compensation should not be a 4-letter word. It should be, I think, something people are encouraged to talk about within reason. I don't think you would want, my title right now is senior manager. I don't think you would want me talking salary with someone that's a specialist or a coordinator level. So encouraging to talk about it within reason, I think, is important, because I think everyone needs to better understand their value. And I think while these benchmark reports are great and really helpful for folks in compensation, at least to me personally, they don't make a lot of sense. So I think there's a lot of
variables that come in.
There's a lot of variables, and I just think for someone that's not in compensation, I think it's important for them to be able to talk to their colleagues about it, talk to HR about it. And maybe HR and compensation, maybe they need to be the ones to reach out and start that conversation. Internal training or internal knowledge base of how to have that conversation, how to really understand how we've decided to structure your compensation.
Yeah, that's the important part, I think, right? Which is internally, what is our compensation philosophy and what does that mean? So basically, how do we decide what you're paid? And then you can have a discussion based on that, right? So it's not necessarily, in this case, it's not what the market was paying. I'm sure that was underlying all of this, right? Like at some point, they made sense that you were fairly compensated that way. But internally, for sure, there should be a policy, and it's going to be law now in a lot of states: California, Massachusetts, Washington, D.C., Pittsburgh, Philadelphia. I'm blanking on the rest right now, but there's a bunch of states this is happening, and there's going to be even more, that you need alignment to what is the job, what is the description of the job, who's doing that job, and are they paid the same? And that's where I think one of the things you're hitting on there, the pay secrecy or whatever you want to say about it, it shouldn't be a 4-letter word. We should do away with this. I call it old world because I think about it from like our parents' generation or our parents' generation, where you did not talk about that. I was raised that way. You do not talk about what people make.
Right. Same in my household. It was just...
It is a 4-letter word.
It was a 4-letter word. Right. Exactly. But today's day and age, it's...
To your point, at least on the same level, right? We should... Or even if you don't have those conversations, it should be up to the company's philosophy and the way that they communicate about pay, that that if you're a marketing manager and other people in the marketing manager level with similar responsibilities, that you are paid equally. We make sure that here's how, and look, here's an audit to prove it.
Right. Exactly. Right? And I think a lot of companies in their mission statements, they talk about transparency.
Yeah.
I think this falls under transparency. I think when those mission statements are drafted and, set in stone, they talk about, as an executive level group, we're going to tell you everything we know about how the business is performing, which is so important for employees to know. But I think this falls under the transparency bucket too, of telling your employees how you're compensating and why you're choosing to go that way.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think a lot of times when organizations say that, it's well-meaning. It's that we want to give you the context for the information, or we want to give you the context and the information for the decisions that are being made. But I think if you're going to have that as a mission, it should be, we default to transparency everywhere. And I think you make a very good point. It should not be an analyst needs to know what a senior exec's making, because that's going to be a huge difference. And that can be That can be shocking
Yes.
and demotivating or
Yes.
inspiring, depending on the way you do
Exactly.
it. But if you're at the same level and doing the same job, and then we will make sure that is fair, and we will do a regular audit or however the company wants to describe it to say that here's what it is, and you have access to that whenever you want.
Right.
That can be transparency. too.
Exactly. And I also think, this was really hard. Every conversation I went to, I was shaking, I was nervous. They were never an easy conversation to have, but I never felt like, I feel like you can leave a meeting and be like, am I crazy in thinking that way? Am I wrong? I never left feeling wrong. That conversation I referenced with my CMO did not go well, but I wasn't like scolded for having had that conversation. So it wasn't a bad thing that I had approached him. Same with HR. They were glad that I had figured this out and came to them about it. So I think a lot of people fear backlash for bringing it up. And I do think it's probably a special case scenario. I think at some organizations, you will face some internal backlash, or you could, depending on the culture of your company. You're supposed to be able to go to your HR team to have that conversation and have them guide you in the right way. That did not happen at my company because HR had left. So I had to, but knowing the culture of my company, I was comfortable going straight to my boss for that reason.
Yeah, where you might fear backlash, that's why these laws are being enacted, right? So on a more meta level, those are the kind of things you can advocate for if it's a topic that you are concerned about. Not you specifically, speaking more to the general audience now. That is why those are being in place. It's almost like whistleblower laws, right? Like if you expose your company, those laws are put in place mostly for doing something unethical or illegal, and you do that and you fear reprisal. Well, those are there to protect you. And that's what these new laws are here for as well. And while there have been some on the books, even at the federal level for decades now, like going back to the 60s and 70s, they're very broad. And don't cover a lot of what we encounter today. And I think, some of these new laws, it's great progress would be my argument. The more that we can get that spread across the entire country, the better, because that way they're hard, to the point you just made. These are hard conversations to have, regardless of any other structures that are in place. At least knowing that you're protected can help facilitate those conversations more. And at the end of the day, this is probably something that everybody wants. We all want to say we're paying fairly across genders, across all kinds of demographics for similar jobs. We can have discussions around what is a similar job and what constitutes fair pay when there's a lot more than just cash involved. And those are the beautiful benefits of being a compensation person. If we were to say that at its highest level, I think that we should aim to do that is the right thing to do. Then we can work together to figure out the rest.
Definitely. So I encourage everyone, if you're compensation, reach out to your employees. If you are an employee, just curious about the topic, talk to your HR folks, talk to compensation. It is hard, but the benefits are worth it. And even if the story does not get played out as you hope and as you want it to, I think just being able to understand your worth and defend your worth at the end of the day is worth all of that. It's
a great point. There's a great amount of knowledge to be gained just by, sadly, going through a hard process like that. Hopefully we don't have to have everybody go through those processes to understand how they're paid and how the organization views that. But these should be conversations that we should encourage, right? You should be able to understand why you're paid, what you're paid, where that's calculated from, what that means to your organization without having to go through these trials and tribulations. That distract from your work and make it harder to do your job and all the other downside consequences of it, right? We shouldn't encourage those things to happen in order to make sure that you're paid fairly. But thank you for coming on today. Appreciate you coming and sharing your story.
This was great. I hope it even helped one person.
Yeah,
so
I'm glad it worked out well on your part. I'm glad these laws are being put in place. I think the more that we get these out there and share these, the more that it will help. So thank you.
Great. Thank you.